Hello and welcome to season 2, episode 4 of What So What Now What. Ravi, how are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. Not too bad myself. How
Good,
are you?
good. Just hot off the heels of a lame Theresa May announcement. I think it was pretty much an announcement of nothing.
Yeah, right. And I think we were sort of we set ourselves to start recording just as she was going on. I was like, yeah, let's push back half an hour, and that half an hour turned into what is an hour now before I actually got being able to sit down. So yeah, here we are.
But let's not turn this podcast into a political podcast. Today's episode is about champions. And before we get into that, let's also do a bit of follow up on natural language processing. How do you find the episode last week?
Yeah, it was good. I quite enjoyed talking about that and listening back to it as I sort of half listened back to while doing something else because obviously you never like listening back to yourself. Um, I think it was quite well reasoned. I think from the feedback we've gotten on social media from people I've spoken to, it was very interesting in terms of not only just the how it all works and put together, but also I think we did semi-successfully lower the tone of it from the hyper episode where it was easier to understand and paced quite nicely. And I think
Right.
the other thing we were able to do in that episode, which I quite liked, we've got some really good feedback again from the wider audience, is just about the opportunity that this provides and sort of how this has set up the next few years in technology and indeed in data.
Exactly. It's such an important pivotal sort of first step that enables, I think, many different ways of doing analysis, and more importantly, ways of empowering analysts, more importantly, to do their
Mm-hmm.
job. And I think, up until now, it's been about sort of empowering the developer. And I think that continues to be the narrative for power users. But for more broad use, if you look at the way technology and sort of software and industry is moving, this
Mm-hmm.
is a very important step for Tableau to make, and also many other partners who've been doing the same thing, whether it's Power BI, Click, or whoever comes around tomorrow doing the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing that's also worth mentioning here is the fact that it's not that it's easy to forget that business isn't comprised. I think this is going to touch on what we're going to talk about today, actually, but it's not actually comprised of analysts and developers, right? If you think about like the largest
Right.
businesses in the world,
Yeah.
they're not made of. Not everyone's an analyst, right? Not everyone's sitting down and building dashboards
It's
or
true.
charts and
True.
has that mindset of trying to investigate stuff. And this sort of gives that data to the users to want to use one of the marketing phrase at your fingertips, right?
It
It's literally there for you to start typing and being a bit more natural and asking those questions and getting a computer understanding it and then giving that answer back to you.
in many ways, I think being an analyst is only part of many people's jobs, and the very few people who are exclusively analysts, as it were. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, this kind of power kind of really helps. Um, we had a bit of a joke at the beginning at the beginning of the podcast, about our name, and it's probably about time we change that, right?
Yeah, I mean, if we hark back to the first episode, the reason we came up with that, the presentational structure, where you're like, this is how
Yeah.
you break it down. But I think since it's been a year and a bit now since we've been there, it's like, well, I hate telling people like, oh, 3 watts pod. What did that mean? Oh, well, it's called what, so what, now what? Why is it called that? And it's like,
What? Not what?
we're,
Not what?
yeah, exactly. It starts turning into a rap song, like what?
Say
So
what?
so let's change that. Let's change that.
Absolutely. And so we do have a new name, that we're going to be pushing, into our podcast, or more importantly, across our sort of podcasting content. It's called Datum.
Datum.
Datum is itself actually a word. I should probably touch on where I came across this word. I think,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of a guy called Nicholas Felton. And in one of his
Ah, yes, of
reports,
course.
he actually built his own app to help him collect, information. And so datum, if you look it up in
Ah.
the dictionaries, it really literally translates into pieces of information. So he built an app to collect pieces of information. And so I thought it was quite a fitting name for our podcast, because what we hope to do over, over time, is to have sort of these snippets of information on different topics and different subjects, whether technical or soft. And so I thought it sort of mapped quite nicely to our theme. So borrowing a little bit from the shoulders of the great, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that. I think that really fits into the rebrand from just generally talking about a topic at a time to actually thinking about how we're structuring with the bits and the bytes. So, but don't worry, listeners. Like it's going to be exactly the same structure, the exact same content. We just changed the name.
Right.
It's like when Google became Alphabet, but
Right.
really in your head it's still Google, right? That sort of thing.
Yeah, and we're taking
Or SIF and GIF is the other one for UK listeners.
Yeah, exactly. And we're just taking the opportunity also to do a bit of a rebrand, not restructure content, but to make sure that we spread our content in sort of more places. So when we make this name change, you shouldn't need to change anything in your podcast app of choice. The feed will automatically update existing and new content with the name. If you uh, if you want to catch our episodes in new places, we're going to be also putting them on YouTube. And we're also going to be using a nice, wonderful NLP powered feature of YouTube to produce transcripts of the show. So, going right back to episode number 1, you'll be able to find transcripts on our website. And our website is going to be Datam Podcast.
Oh, can't even get this one right.
Can't get this one right. Datampodcast.com. So it's much, much easier to find and type.
I think also, and also as it spreads through word of mouth, it'd be easier for people to say, "They've got listening to this great podcast. Oh, what's it called? It's called Datum." Rather than what's it called? It's called what? So what now? Oh man!
Yeah. When you have what in the what's it called? Oh yeah, that's a real tongue twister.
Oh yeah, right. And for our quest for global domination, it's not helpful to be down on that SEO, right?
Oh man, yeah. I think if you just search what so what now what, even the acronym which I spent ages putting into SEO web pages, it still doesn't come up. So no, this is a very welcome little sort of change for us, and more broadly shouldn't change our content. But
so Tim,
yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so Tim, season 2, episode 4 of the Datum podcast. What are we talking about?
Absolutely, we are talking about champions, not the Yorkshire slang for absolutely excellent. We're talking about champions in the organizations, right?
Exactly, and again, it's not anything to do with sports as much as I'd love to wax lyrical about sports all day. This is another one of my passion topics, which is champions, and by this we mean the evangelists, the experts, the organic heroes of an organization, and the people who they have something within them, a quality that means they're almost selfless in the way they sort of share share stuff that they're interested in, like the passion was the word. Pet passions. No, that's not it.
Damn, Ravi, you went straight into
passion
a description
project.
there, like
yeah. Passion projects.
I was gonna challenge you in literally every word you use there for a champion, because I think in different places they mean different things, right?
Okay, let's go. Right, hit me.
So I said
evangelist.
This is actually something that I want to get off my chest, because it massively frustrates me that I think in a lot of contexts we come up with the term champions, and we don't realize that a champion is different in every organization, but we use this generic sort of descriptor and we all think they mean the same thing. And then you get sort of this discourse about what it means to be a champion in a particular company, or how to do a champion for a particular product, let's say Tableau or Adobe, which I've talked about in the past. And no two sort of things translate to each other, and it really frustrates me that that's not apparent when that discourse happens. Everyone thinks a champion is the same thing, and yet as consultants we see this time and time again. A champion who might be successful in one place would absolutely flop somewhere else.
Yeah, and I think I'm laughing along the way because it's literally what I did. The first thing I did was exactly that. It's like, what is a champion? Let me explain to you by using 7 other different words for champions. Like, opened up a thesaurus to the word champion and just blurted it back at you. I didn't really explain what I meant, which is a very valid point. And yeah. I actually do agree with you to an extent, because I think you really do need to be very careful on how you define what a champion is,
right?
Especially when we're thinking about it in the context of a role,
exactly.
or a characteristic or a trait. Because again, like you said, it means different things. And like as you say, if I picked up Google's ethics champion and put them in the middle of a medical ethics champion scenario, that person would be like, hang on a second, I need to go back to like medical school or something.
Yeah, exactly. You need the context.
Yeah, context is everything.
It's absolutely key. And so, like, one of the things I also sort of find really difficult in this discussion about champions is that yes, they mean different things in different places. However, I think people do need some sort of commonality in the way they find them. So whilst different people have different qualities, and that's intrinsic in the way that just people in an organization work, you need some sort of I'm going to say common way of cultivating champions, because it's not sustainable in an organization to go around to each individual, figure out how they work, and then try and bring out the champion in them, right? You don't have time to do that. You kind of need a way of cultivating champions in an enterprise situation where you have thousands of employees who are accessing an analytical bit of software, right?
That's exactly it. And this is this touched on some pieces of stuff I've been doing a lot recently, which is thinking about a lot of this sort of enterprise level rollout, and like, how do you find your champions when you're if you start at the bottom, right? If you're starting right at the bottom of the wire with a startup company and you're going to add 10 employees tomorrow, and you're saying each one of you is going to be head of a department, and then in a year's time we're going to add 3 more people to each department, and you're going to find one of those people is going to be a champion in that department. Right. That's easy. Like, well, not easy, of course, because startups are never easy and there's all sorts of stuff going on. But in a hypothetical world, in a ceteris paribus, all things being equal scenario, that's perfect. Right now, companies who want to find champions and grow champions and have this champion mindset, they don't stop working just because someone wants to have this global strategy for building this culture, right? Because cultural change management takes time. Cultural change takes time, but you can't just stop doing what you're doing day in, day out, because you're like, I need this one full-time employee to go around and find out per region who are the champions, and then interview them, survey them, have this standardized way of measuring how good they are, and then we're going to come back and we're going to say, you guys are the champions, and then we're going to start. Like, no board or anyone is ever going to sign up on that. And if they do, well, kudos to how you sold it, because it's almost like you're trying to fix your car while it's moving, right? That's what we're getting at. Like, you're in the Le Mans rally, with an old car, and you're trying to add a turbo booster and DRS at the same time while also trying to be competitive, right?
Exactly. It's kind of a tough thing to do, and so I think we're sort of slowly transitioning into the so what here, where we sort of try and unpick sort of I guess different types of champions, but also just generally sort of why they're important, because
and what their role is as well.
Yeah, exactly. I guess let's start there. Like, what's the role of a champion, or at least how do you see that sort of play out in organizations that you've engaged with?
Yeah, so I'm really the way I always approach this is, it's like, where do you want to be in a year's time, and how much control do you have on what happens next? Because getting that buy-in from the top, to say, for someone to say, this is a directive that we're going to follow, we're going to commit to this route for at least 1 year, and then we're going to review it. That's really important, and that's where you typically start. But also, you need to get the people at the bottom on side. So it's like a top down and bubble up, and then you're in the middle trying to coordinate things and orchestrate. Now, the role of the champion basically is because most firms have the pyramid structure, right? So there's a few people at the top and many people at the bottom, and no directive from the top will influence and make some people at the bottom do exactly what you tell them to, no matter how hard you try, no matter how much incentives you put in. And again, this then comes back to my behavioral economics love, right? A bit where you can nudge and incentivize and do all these different things to change people, but really what you need is to use almost like a sales strategy, right? Where you land and expand. You basically plant people and enable those people in those different parts of the organization to become an extension of yourself and the vision that you want to embody,
right? And
therefore a vision that the directive embodies.
It's a really difficult thing here, because even with all those things, right, things still go wrong, right? Even with all those sort of targeted efforts, and very structured and very organized sort of approach.
Mm-hmm.
And more ways than sort of a very simple job description to do, like, I don't know, let's say development work, or a role description in an organization to do a specific thing. A champion sort of job description, as it were, is kind of just to do whatever's required to get the company forward, or sort of push the mission of the company forward in a way, but there's no real direction of where that is.
No, no, and that's where personality traits really come into it, right? Because that person has to have a vested interest, right? They have to actually want to do it, like, because if you tell someone, they can easily retort, I'm doing my day to day. It's not part of my job description. If you want to pay me more or change my role, then yeah, I'll do it. Otherwise, why should I? What is it in it for me, right? Because this is generally how we work. That person then also has to have a desire to learn more and develop and almost go beyond. And as you mentioned, it's unwritten, their directives, right? They might have this thing of, I'd love to make this a thing in our company and grow this service and make sure that everyone thinks like I do and sees the value in this awesome thing. But they have to have that drive, and then also feel like they have the tools and the ability to go out and do that. Because as I said earlier, like, these people, very rarely will this become a full-time role. Very rarely. It'd be people doing this on the side as part of their job, or as a passion project, to push that needle. And most of the time, what will happen is a company's needs day to day will take priority over some strategic goal that you might have started down, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And if I sort of touch on one aspect of this is, I think this fundamentally falls apart when a company's mission isn't actually very clear. So it's very hard for champions to sort of run with the flow if there's no sort of very clear mission and objective of the company as such. So if I take a very simple example, let's say I run Acme Industries, and our mission is to missions are normally quite vague in a sense, aren't they?
Of course,
I was about to give something really specific, and then I fell into my own trap there. But missions are sort of the missions try and encapsulate the ethos and the way in which a company does something, and to what end, right? So it's like, here's an objective, this is how we're going to do it, and we hope to get there in this particular way.
So both of us are fans of Amazon and Apple, right? So what would you say Amazon's mission is?
Oh man, Amazon's mission is probably to help you get from A to Z, whatever A to Z is.
Right, true. And then Apple's would be, I guess, to create a product that's a pleasure to use, which doesn't require manual.
I don't think it's even create like a product. It's to create delight in products or something.
An
like
experience.
It's to create delight. Yeah, full stop. How they
just
do
get
that?
Your Joni get your Joni I voice out. We really thought about the phone,
but they're really high level sort of statements that allow, I guess, employees to morph into how they see that mission. And generally speaking, a good mission means that everyone in the organization might interpret certain aspects slightly differently, but everyone understands the end goal very well and understands, the ethos behind something. So you'll get this in consulting, where you go to one company and a thing that people will say is, that's not how we do things around here, right? And those are the companies where the mission is ingrained. Like, people probably spend 5 minutes reciting the mission before they start working every morning, and then
pledge allegiance to the flag.
Yeah, exactly. And then you go to other organizations where the mission statement is a little bit sort of vague. It sounds like something you've heard before. Actually, you'll find employees describing their company like another company. So, one example is going to a client and they'll describe themselves as X. Then I'll go into another client and they'll describe themselves, oh, have you heard of this guys? Yeah, we're like them. And it's like, oh yeah, okay, yeah. Like,
what is it? Well, my favorite fad of like 2 years ago is like, we're Uber for.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Deliveroo is Uber for food.
Yeah, exactly. Those are companies with no mission, is literally just latching onto anything they can find.
Well, I think Laundrap was like, we're Uber for laundry. It's like, but you're not. You're saying not. Uber just because like you press a button and something arrives.
Exactly. And Uber's philosophy isn't just Like they were missing the point. They were referring to Uber as
Completely.
in scale rather than in ambition. But we're sort of going off the track here.
So I'm going to challenge you there,
Go for
Tim,
it.
on the mission point, because I don't think that the mission is what a champion sees. What the thing that guides someone like that is, because we're very centralized people, right? As human beings, we're very centralized. What is it? How is this going to change my life? How is it going to change the way I think? And I think that's where everything starts. Like, if you find that why and the what within you, and then you start relating out slowly in like concentric circles. You start with yourself, and then you go out to your department, you go out to your job, and then you eventually reach the wider business. But really, where I'd say it starts is when you can say, the value I see here will help this department. It's very much a departmental thing. And then what will happen is, if there's a platform for people to showcase the success stories and the dollar value savings and the cost savings and the time savings, that's where other people start to adopt, and that's where you see other champions come up. Now, we're sort of drifting towards, how do you measure a champion as a person, but then how do you measure the impact?
Right. I think I just want to stop you there a second, because I think I think you skipped something there, which is
Right.
I think you're falling victim to this thing I said earlier on, which is you've described a particular type of champion. And so I think you absolutely nailed it when you said, how do you measure champions, right? How do you measure the qualities of a champion? And I think this is actually a really good point to sort of just step back a minute and let's just sort of thrash out the different kinds of champions. So
Sure.
I made some sort of notes. So mission, champions of your mission was an easy one. Who do you see that portrays the mission of your company? Number one.
Sure.
The second one was people who challenge your thinking. So champions aren't there just to just follow the Bible, as it were. They're also there to challenge it. Challenge it, the way it's understood, challenge the way things
The
are done.
disruptors.
Exactly. And then once your challenges sort of come to play, you need some early adopters to sort of take on that philosophy and try it out. Take risks on behalf of others and find out where you waste time and where you don't waste time. And then that's where your value drivers turn up, right? Because the value drivers say, hey, look, we've tried these 20 things. These are the 3 things that actually create value for us today. Let's accelerate these forward. And then to do that, guess what? You need CPD activities, right? So then you have champions.
So CPD here being
continual professional development. So training at work. So not just CPD of others, so training of others, but also training of self. Because if you're going to go out and show people how to use this wonderful stuff, you might have learned it as an early adopter, but when you have to teach it, it's a completely different thing. So you have to kind of give yourself some training. Maybe train the trainer or some sort of training like that to then allow yourself. And then the last quality in my mind is sort of professional leaders, people who can take all of those things we've just mentioned and package it into an individual, right? And then sort of guide each and every one of those activities through its fruition, as it were. It's sort of to the end conclusion. And so I don't think that champions or a champion has to have all these qualities. I think in an organization you can have different kinds of champions working to the same aim, as long as there's some sort of level of leadership that's bringing the activities of those people together.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic point, mainly because of the way you sort of ramped that up, and I really like that. So I'm just going to go back to the bits that I quite liked, because, like, for example, the challenge your thinking one is really important. The people that I will stop you and say, but why are we doing it like that? Or why are we focusing on that aspect, when, if you think about this as a wider thing and where we want to be, how do we change that? That's really important. Now, the other thing that's also important is the value drivers, because, as I mentioned, something that's very important from the get-go is to get some senior buy-in to show the impact it will have. And this is where the early adopters are so vital. The blueprint you set out with these first, like, the first sort of men or women, children who go, well, obviously not children, because children don't work, but like the folks that go ahead and start saying, like, right, we're going to do it this way for a period of time, and we're going to set up this framework, and we're going to make mistakes, we're going to learn from them,
right?
And then what we're going to do is feed that back, and then we're going to try it one more time, and then one more time, and then once we've done it 3 times over, or however many times, or how many few times you want to do it, that's when you can go back to the business and say, hey, so that thing we tried, it actually is going to be a fantastic thing, or maybe it's something we need to tweak something and do something slightly different. Because as we mentioned in a podcast where we talked about platforms, moving away from old school platforms is really hard.
Really hard.
And also moving away from new platforms as well. Like, I think about Microsoft and Azure. The second you bought into Azure and everything that Azure offers, ripping yourself off that and saying, hey, we're not going to use that, but can we keep Office 365?
Yeah. It's not gonna happen.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'd love if the listeners to actually had this conversation with a Microsoft rep. I'd love to know how that goes down. It's like it's so easy to get stuck into. It's like, for example, another like more human example is, so few people change their banks. Like a current account.
Right. Yeah.
Once you've got it, you just keep it.
Yeah.
What's another one? A washing machine. I once likened a database to a washing machine. You don't change it until it breaks.
Exactly.
You don't change it until you literally
every
have
decade.
To.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's such a long life cycle. So again, I've gone off a bit, but it's once you have those things in place, that's when you can move forward. Now, a lot of people jump to the self-development section and the training section really early on, because they think, oh well, let's grow our champions.
Too early. Yeah.
It depends, right? Because the thing about going too far too fast is you lose that buzz, right?
True.
That buzz about the new technology that you've showcased and the new technology you've shown, or the new way of thinking you've shown. Like, for example, I've heard a customer, again, we're going to go back to Tableau here, and what they did was they actually just spent a year going from department to department and giving people 2-week trials and then taking it away. Just recycling.
Right.
And then the way they identified their champions is the people who kept coming back and saying, when do I get that thing back? That was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's how you spot those people who can immediately think and challenge the work they're doing and see how this can augment, improve, or develop the work that they do.
Right. Yeah. It's a really tough one as well, because one thing I don't hear a lot of. I hear a lot about champions, and champions is a very individualistic term, right? Like, who
Correct.
are individuals. But what I don't hear a lot about is sort of champion teams, you know? I've never heard like a business leader talk about champions as being a team. So this team, okay, actually I have. But it's very rare to hear people talk about this team is our champion for this, right? It seems to be all this emphasis on the individual. And actually, I think there's a lot of pressure, especially in an organization, to put on someone, because it can either go one of two ways. Either that person really steps up and sort of pushes the company forward in lots of different ways. But if the incentive structure isn't set up right for that individual and also for their own development, it can sort of go the other way, right? You spend all this effort and time developing champions for them to only leave because you've trained them up so well. They've become sort of industry leaders, as it were, sort of mini champions in the community as well as in your organization.
They've become unicorns.
Exactly. And so and it doesn't take them long to figure that out, and they move on. On the flip side, if you sort of water it down too much and you make your whole team's champions, then no one real person has actually got the incentive to sort of push something forward to new levels. It's sort of, when something's a responsibility of the collective, then it tends to be no one's responsibility, right?
Exactly.
But that's really sort of, you want somewhere in the middle, some sort of balance between the two, where you kind of had different champions. I'll touch on Adobe because I love Adobe. It's too much. I think I keep referring to Adobe all the time. I love their evangelists, right? And to me, an evangelist is a champion. They're a technical champion, as it were. They show you how to do things with the product. Okay, so if I look at Adobe, Terry White, I don't know how many YouTube videos I've watched of Terry White showing people how to do stuff in Adobe InDesign, Illustrator, or Photoshop. And equally, there are other champions in other sort of products, but they all have sort of unique aspects of them. But when they come together as a team to make something, sort of the quality of their output isn't just the sum total of three people. It sort of transcends to another level, right? It's like when you bring these three awesome people together and you put them in a room, the output isn't 3x, it's 10x, because they're multiplying off each other's sort of brilliance, and that's the hard thing to really cultivate in a team.
it's not impossible. That's like not to put a damper on it, but
Right.
it's such a rare thing
Very rare.
because
yeah.
that is the fundamental issue that we have in our time. Like this is going to get really deep and meta, right? It's the fundamental issue we have in our time as employees. The reason that in the world of tech and data, we're going to have to wait till the primary school kids who are learning how to like code a Raspberry Pi in the job market before we get to this point. The reason for that is because the skill shortage right now in this field is so big, and people aren't thinking the way you and I think, right? If we have to break down the amount of times we have to break down the way we've approached a problem, because at the end of the day, as consultants, both of us are problem solvers. I'd say I think that's the easiest way I've explained it to folks who are prospectively joining the data school, or if I've explained it to my friends about what I do. It always comes back to I'm solving other people's problems, and that's a fundamental thing. Like you have to, if you're changing 10,000 people in a company, and you're saying, you know, that thing where you used email and you all were like, oh man, email, not sure about that, to get your reports. And we weren't having meetings all the time. Well, we're about to change that again. We're going to give you this tool called Tableau, and you have to log into this platform, and then you have to find the charts you want to look at, and then you have to click around on them because that's how you investigate. It's like, no, give me the report. like that's exactly what happens. And the role of a champion is, I think the thing that is easily missed out from your list is, I guess the CPD one does cover it, but it's an educator. It's someone that's constantly educating other people in the organization, people around them, and really continually, like thanklessly, relentlessly selling that message. You know, it's that a good example would be like, you know, that the person that tells, like Pavlovian training, right? When you're telling someone something over and over and then giving them a task afterwards, suddenly that then becomes intrinsically into habit, and then you start doing that without realizing it. Again, this is where we get the nudge concepts in. But yeah, the cultural change and the educational change is long and difficult. And as you say, it's also the other issue that people might find is people leave. But the trick is to build that mentality within people that, like, we're building something that you want to be part of. You don't want to miss it.
Okay, so this really nicely touches on something that companies don't often think about before sort of investing heavily in time and resources and, you know, obviously money. And that is culture. And it's something that, you know, I came across a couple of weeks ago, which is the model for managing complex change. This is sort of a theoretical model. I'll put a link to the show notes. But what I really love about this is that it sort of breaks down sort of the different components for change. And ultimately, culture is about delivering continuous change in an organization. I think people always think culture is this static thing that doesn't change. It's just this thing that stands still. And what you're trying to do is defend it. When actually, culture is actually about this sort of constantly evolving sort of workplace and how you continually sort of add elements to that. And what I love about this model is that it nicely touches on the core components. So vision, skills, incentives, resources, action plan. And then that all results in success. And we've kind of actually touched on all these aspects in some of our thinking. But what it also shows is sort of what happens when you're just missing one of these components. So, right, you could have, you know, I'll just give one simple example. You could have the vision, the skills, incentives, and resources, but completely screw up on your action plan, which means you end up with a false start. And I love that. I love that because it's so easy to just forget this.
Yeah, and that's like, if you don't have a vision or a goal or something you're aiming at, and you don't, like, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to start off with this first pilot, then we're going to try this different thing, then try this other thing, and all that's where you get that false start. And I think the next one on that, like this matrix that Tim's referring to, is if you don't have the resources. So you've got the plan, you've got the skills, the incentives, and the vision, but you don't have the you don't have the resources to do it, which means, like, you're pounding your head against the wall almost. You're talking about this grand vision that you have about what you're going to do within the actual grand scheme of things, and then suddenly you're like, well, actually, we're going to take 2 people off your team, or we're going to take off, you know, I don't know, 3 different things.
Or so you can have this product. Here's
you
Tableau,
run out of money.
Here's Power BI, but you can't have enough licenses for it to actually make it work, right?
Right, exactly. Like, we wouldn't make this enterprise wide, and you tell everyone about it, and then suddenly it's like, we're only going to buy 10 licenses.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. And let's cycle the licenses around while we're at it so we can get 30 people
right.
using those 10. So common, so common. And this is it. And it's, I mean, we're not going to sort of pivot to culture now because I think that's a separate topic. Analytical culture is a separate topic, but it's so vital because without culture, you don't create any sort of canvas where champions even stand a chance of succeeding. And then, if I touch on the last thing, which is professional leaders, I think this is the one thing that I think most companies actually do have a good feeling for. By virtue of other sort of mechanisms in the business. So you tend to find professional leaders are incredibly good at navigating, I'm going to say, company politics. And I don't mean that in a negative way necessarily. I just mean sort of understanding the way your particular organization goes from A to B is really important. And professional leaders are, just naturally rise to the top because they prove time and time again they know how to navigate this and they know how to handle these things in lots of
I think
ways.
and I think that's awareness. I think that's awareness of the industry you're working in, the company you're working in, and as you say, those people self-select themselves as like, I want to be 2 rungs higher. So what do I need to do? They speak to the right people, understand the company, they understand what matters to the right people, and then they sell that slice of the dream to them, right?
Exactly.
And then that in turn allows them to motivate the people further downstream. This is where we're touching on that bubble up and bubble up and top down thing, right? They're able to speak to senior management and really speak to those people in the higher positions and offer them something that they're interested in,
right?
And then they're able to turn around to everyone that's going to do the work, and they're able to say, hey, this is what you're interested in, this is what I'm going to do to help you. And it suddenly stops becoming that thing where it's like, how is this going to help me? And it becomes this thing where it's like, let's do this together, and you're creating this really motivational culture. And I think that's where we get to the start of this whole piece, which is you're thinking about there's different types of champions, and that's awesome, right? That's such a cool thing to understand and be aware of, because it reminds me at least that there's so many different activities that can be done in organizations to get the right people on side.
Right.
And it doesn't start with just planting one person who's really passionate and thinks that it's interesting in like 3 different teams.
Exactly. Wow.
So
go for it.
So what? Like what next? What are we doing with this? So like the thing that I'd like to finish off on is the measurement piece I talked about.
Mm-hmm.
So measuring champions is really important because you want to measure that progress. Because if we go back to that frustration piece, if you don't have the action plan and the vision, right? If you don't have that sort of goal, and then you can't come back to that directive that you've had for a year and say, here's what we've done and here's what's changed, and you can't map that growth of individuals, of teams, of the company, of departments, and the impact you've had as a leader, as a value driver, as an adopter, you can't really go back and justify the things you've done. And it is so important. The amount of customers I've spoken to on this sort of the strategic level and said, you really have to start thinking about collecting those use cases, collecting those dollar value, time saving things that really help you drive yourself forward.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where it really comes down to the fact that if you're not able to do that and pull those things out on demand, and you're not collecting them as you go, first of all, you can't. It's really hard to retrospectively collect those things.
Right.
Second of all, you can't use those figures and that data to motivate people. Like, for example, if you could show someone, here's let me go back to an example with my Tableau Public profile. I can scroll back to my first ever pieces of work on there, and then scroll back up to my most recent pieces, and I can show that journey. Right now, that's a really powerful thing to show. A middle of me a few months ago, if I was feeling down or something, right?
Yeah.
Or me next week when I'm feeling like, oh man, I'm really forgetting all this stuff. But you really need to show that journey and measure that journey and allow people to reflect and understand that what they're gaining, right?
Exactly.
And to stop them getting frustrated.
Absolutely. And I think also touching on that, I think the most important, the most valuable part of that exercise is actually context. And you can't get context by simply sitting in your own organization. You can't get context by just going around, meeting rooms and asking people, hey, what do you think of, this work or the value this can bring? You get context by taking yourself out into the wider community, as it were, whether it's your industry, whether it's other peers in the same organization, but in different business units that see value in different ways, whether it's finance, HR, legal. And you get context by immersing yourself in other places where value sort of bubbles up to the top. So maybe going to conferences and getting involved in debates and stuff. And I know this sounds like I'm turning into a marketing sort of marketeer for events, but there really is no better value than actually just talking to other people who are doing the same thing, because it's only then when you, let's say, have to share your ideas with people that you really get the critique that you kind of need, that you'd never get inside of your organization, because
or any echo chamber for that matter,
exactly,
right?
exactly. Absolutely, it's the biggest criticism of some of the communities that we're part of, but it's exactly that. And you kind of, you need to go somewhere where no one knows who you are, no one knows what you do, people aren't sort of drinking the Kool-Aid, and they can just give you raw, honest feedback. Because one of the funniest sort of contrasting things is, obviously, there's this Power BI versus Tableau world stuff, okay? And what I always find funny is that people who absolutely love Power BI, and they're professionals who literally their whole entire career in Power BI, they get Power BI, they get the way it works, they get the challenges that it can solve. Then on the other hand, you have sort of Tableau professionals who, let's be fair, haven't been around as long as Power BI professionals. But on the flip side, they understand the Tableau philosophy, okay? And they have this sort of real friction where they kind of try and go at each other and say, hey, this is better. How can you use that? And how can you do that? And they're arguing completely different points. It's like, if somebody who's using Power BI clearly doesn't care about X, and someone who's using Tableau clearly doesn't care about Y. That's why they're using those different things. That's why, with all due respect, they ended up in different places, because they see the world differently. And so when people argue, when people go back and forth because they see the world differently, that gets you nowhere. But when you have a common understanding of a goal, and you go out to the community and you talk about that goal and how to get there, then you actually start talking about the same thing, and you can actually get valuable feedback about where you're heading and where you're not heading.
Yeah. And I think to use an analogy, it's like when you compare phones, right? Like someone who might be using a really old LG phone, but really all they're using it for is getting text message, using WhatsApp every now and again, and sending receiving and sending phone calls. Whereas other people will have an iPhone and they'll be like completely using it all the time, because that becomes their centralized point. And that's exactly, there is no superiority between two products as you mentioned, because they service completely different crowds. And it comes back to exactly what you said. It's about what is important to an organization.
Right.
That's what it ultimately comes down to. And that's the same thing for champions, I think.
Exactly. And I think that's the most valuable bit. That's the most important. So what, understanding the context of where you are as a company, who you have as, your champions, your individuals, and then who your wider workforce is basically. And then having a clear understanding of where you're heading, so that you can actually bring all the constituent parts of that journey together in the right time, in the right place, so that you can actually deliver some of that change. And, this is all abstract. We haven't once today talked about anything tangible that you can actually hold or see. So that in itself is actually kind of hard, because, we might describe it one way, but in reality, it looks entirely different in different organizations.
And maybe that's another podcast. Right? Maybe that's another podcast where we actually get into the weeds a bit and say, here's some raw examples, some tools, some things you can do. Obviously, a lot of our examples will be on Tableau Server, Alteryx,
right,
among other things. Maybe even quantified self really falls into this quite nicely, actually.
Oh man, so much there. I think it's funny. Quantified self is one of those great areas where, whenever you go to a meetup, everyone sort of respects the talk that's going on, because you all track such different things about yourself that no one can really speak up and say you're doing it wrong, because it's about the self. So no one can really come up to you and say, hey, you're doing that wrong, because no one understands you better than you. That's one of the unique things I love about that community, is that there's no wrong answer, and there's sort of really good mutual respect for everyone's approach, regardless of how simple or complex it is. I love it.
Yeah, yeah, and I think this is definitely for another episode. But a company is definitely doing some quantified self. When you're trying to do some metadata stuff,
Oh wow!
where you're trying to understand how your company works,
Yeah.
that's all quantifying yourself. So,
yeah, literally.
but hey, that's another
in a
episode.
qualitative or quantitative way, it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Okay, great. I think that's been an episode. This is season 2, episode 4. I quoted earlier season 4, episode 2. Got that the wrong way around. Between this episode and the next episode, as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, look out for a change in name. The album art will also change, or the show art will change. But you won't need to change anything in your podcast player. So if you're listening to us now, then you don't need to change anything. Once the change has happened, our Twitter handle will also change. So that will change to Datum Pod. But again, no need to change which account you follow. We'll just simply be doing a little rename switch.
A name swap.
On Twitter. So look out for that. Look out for the messages. Help us spread the message, as it were. We're going to be doing a lot of promotion and trying to get more and more listeners involved. Ravi, my Amazon S3 bucket bill went up this month, so we're definitely getting more listeners, which is great. that's my current benchmark.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. That's our benchmark to see how many listens we're getting. Like, it's quite hard to get that data out of Apple or whatever podcasting app we're using. So we just see how many times that we're being charged for the MP3 to be streamed.
Exactly. Right? It's actually just bandwidth and storage. So it's like, okay, we're producing more episodes, tick. And how much bandwidth are we streaming as a percentage of our total storage, basically? And that's right. Basically the number I'm currently using. And I think the pricing is more complex than that. But anyway, when the number goes up, I'm thinking, yes, we're getting more people, because it's a monthly target. So
wonderful.
Great. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you in the next show.
Cheers, guys. Take it easy.